Now call the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. It's my privilege to rise and support the National Disability Insurance Scheme in the bill that is before this House, because the NDIS is truly a historic reform for our country and for our Parliament. And it couldn't have come any sooner for the more than 400,000 Australians that have a significant disability, and for their families and for their carers. It's particularly important today to acknowledge that the NDIS has bipartisan support, and I would like to take this opportunity to praise government ministers, in particular the member for Maribyrnong, who has championed this cause when he was the Parliamentary Secretary, and also a former State MP, John Della Bosca, who's done a lot of work with the Every Australian Counts campaign. But on our side of the House, I'd also like to pay particular tribute to Senator Mitch Fifield, who's our Shadow Minister on Disabilities, but also to our leader, Tony Abbott, who has personally championed this cause, and in fact in the last year's Polly Pedal that he undertakes annually raised more than $500,000 for carers. It's through a combination of the government and the opposition that we will together see that the NDIS becomes a reality. And we have supported the NDIS in a bipartisan way ever since it was first referred in 2009 to the Productivity Commission, to when $1 billion was allocated over the forward estimates for these launch sites, and to this bill before the House and its subsequent implementation of the NDIS. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, big ideas and big reforms start as a kernel of an idea. But if they are going to be legislated into reality, they do need champions in this place. And I'm proud to say there are those on both sides of the divide. But I also want to pay particular credit to one of my constituents and my friends, whose name is Bruce Bonyhady, who is chairman of Urella and also chairman of Philanthropy Australia. And he has promoted and pursued the concept of the NDIS with every fibre of his body. And as I say, the people who have participated in the Every Australian Counts campaign and so many others, I say thank you. And in my electorate, there are so many organisations and community groups that work in this important area of disability support. There's St Paul's College at Villa Maria, Belmore Special School in Balwyn, the Association for Children with a Disability in Hawthorn, Q Art Studio, which allows people with a disability to pursue their untapped talents for the arts, Emotion 21, which is a wonderful group that allows young people with a disability to actually pursue dance as a way of enjoying their life and pursuing a recreation. Vatmire Industries, which provides employment opportunities, and EDAR, which is in Surrey Hills, Balwyn and Balwyn North in my community. And there are many, many other organisations and outstanding individuals like Ariane Garner-Williams, who I've worked with, who's been an ambassador for people with a disability. During this time, these community groups and these individuals have championed the idea of an NDIS. They have kept the pressure on people in this place to see that this reform becomes a reality. The bill before us today establishes a framework for the NDIS and establishes the NDIS Launch Transition Agency, which will operate the scheme initially in 5 locations starting in mid-2013, in South Australia, the ACT, Tasmania, Hunter in New South Wales and Barwon in my home state of Victoria. This new agency will fund individual support packages and block fund some entities. Eligibility to become a participant requires that a person's impairment to have resulted in, and I quote, substantially reduced functional capacity, which affects their mobility, learning social interaction, communication, self-care or self-management. And once a person is eligible, support can be granted to alleviate, to prevent or to mitigate deterioration in a person's functional capacity. Importantly, people over 65 years of age will not be eligible to request NDIS support. However, if a person is already receiving NDIS support and does turn 65, they can continue with that support. Each eligible person will have a plan prepared for them, detailing the support they receive under the scheme, the management of those funds and the date for review. At a later date, there will be further NDIS rules which will outline the process for becoming a plan manager, as well as rights and processes pertaining to reviews under the scheme. There will be an agency board with a chair and 8 board members who will have a range of skills and experiences across the financial, the insurance and the disability sectors. The Commonwealth will appoint the chair and will require a majority of jurisdictions to support the board appointments. Importantly, there will be an independent advisory council with at least 4 people with disabilities on it, at least 2 carers, someone who has the skills in the supply of equipment to help people with disabilities. And there will be an independent review of the Act that will take place after 2 years. These are important logistics, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, that can actually turn this reform into a reality. It's no secret that we on this side of the House have called on the government to establish a joint parliamentary committee, which would be chaired by representatives of both sides of the political divide to oversee the implementation of the NDIS. Because issues of design, eligibility, delivery will still need to be worked through over the coming years. And this should be done in a bipartisan manner because no one single party or no one single person owns the NDIS. It belongs to the community as a whole, and the notion of a bipartisan committee to oversight its implementation is a step in a positive direction. It is quite different to having a parliamentary committee inquire into this bill or into the NDIS. This would be setting up a permanent committee to deal with the transition and the implementation. And it is unfortunate that the Leader of the Opposition has had to write 5 times to the Prime Minister about this, and my colleague, the member for Dawson, George Christensen, has introduced a private member's bill. But this, despite these efforts on our side, the government has refused to countenance, to this point, this idea of a bipartisan committee to oversight the implementation. Nevertheless, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, will continue to promote this amendment, and we don't want to see a repeat of the wrangling we saw between Liberal premiers, state premiers and the government before the last COAG, because we need to be above the partisanship, particularly when it comes to this reform. At the end of the day, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, this reform is too important for us to fail. The NDIS needs to be properly funded by this government, and they are going to have to explain where are they going to find the additional billions of dollars that the Productivity Commission has said will be necessary over the forward estimates, because the target deadline for getting a full scheme up and running is 2018-2019. And we have criticised that only $1 billion has been established or set aside for the forward estimates to reach these 5 trial sites, which will also reach up to 20,000 people with a significant disability. This is a start, but it is not enough. Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, we are here today debating the NDIS and pushing it through as a parliament as a significant reform because the system has been broken. The system of funding and supporting people with disabilities has failed the Australian people. It's just not right that depending on where you get that, how you got that particular disability, whether it's in a car accident or by birth, or where you live, whether it's in South Australia or Victoria, you are funded differently for the same disability. It is not right. And with another Australian in every 30 minutes getting a significant disability, this is a serious issue. And I want to remind the Chamber what the Productivity Commission said back in July 2011 when they reported to government. The current disability support system is underfunded, unfair, fragmented and inefficient. It gives people with a disability little choice, no certainty of access to appropriate supports and little scope to participate in the community. Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, those are damning words and they resonate not just in this House, they resonate across the Australian community in every small town and in every big city. And if we are going to find that additional $6.5 billion annually that was identified by the Productivity Commission, we will see funding for disabilities increase by up to 90%. Because currently the states and the territories provide $4.7 billion and the Commonwealth $2.3 billion annually for people with disabilities. But we need to find that additional $6.5 billion. And if we do find it in a bipartisan manner, then we will see funding for people with disabilities reach about the same level as the disability support pension. It will be more than we allocate to the PBS, but it will be less than the $18 billion a year that we allocate to Medicare. So questions about the funding are absolutely critical, and it requires bipartisan support on this House, and it requires a decision by the political leadership of this country to prioritise the funding of people with disabilities. Because at the end of the day, we do not have an endless pie of money that we can just pull from for every particular need. We have to prioritise. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to prioritise supporting people with disabilities. Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, my eyes were opened when I was at university teaching tennis on a voluntary basis for a group called the Kids Tennis Foundation. And we would go out to some public courts every week, myself and a man called Bob Crump, and teach kids with Down syndrome how to hit a tennis ball. Now, you would think kids with Down syndrome couldn't hit a tennis ball, and you were right. But the point is that they got out on the court every week, threw a racket around, missed 9 out of 10 balls, but the smiles on their faces, would bring a tear to anyone's eye. And I know that my colleagues on the other side of the House and my colleagues on this side of the House have had similar experiences as they've attended the morning teas in their electorate under the banner of Every Australian Counts, as they've visited Uralla, as they have visited the art studios and the dance studios that give opportunities to young people with a disability, as they have spoken to the carers who give so much of their time and are underpaid to support people with their disabilities, and as they have sat down with the families of a child or an adult with a disability, they have heard those personal stories. And I think the NDIS, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, speaks to our humanity as a nation. It speaks to our personal compassion. It is actually why we are all here. We may disagree on the avenue and the route to finding the same place, but that same place is all about creating a stronger, fairer, more prosperous society. And I think that if we grasp this opportunity to take the NDIS beyond this bill before the House and beyond these 5 trial sites that have been set down, we will have achieved something that previous parliaments have never done. The people of Australia, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, are watching us. They're hoping that we can deliver on our promise, and we should not let them down.